everybody. Welcome to another exciting, fun-filled, expeditious episode of Radiorama, where, as the name implies, I show you how to work on radios and TVs and other stuff that tend to run on glowing vacuum tubes from the 1930s through about the 1960s. And today we have this lovely forest green Crosley and model number E-30GN, which I'm assuming means green. It is AM and FM. And has the 19T8 for FM, 35C5 for output, 12AT7, 12VA6, 12VE6, 12VA6. Condition unknown. Does it work? So right off the bat, the dial light doesn't work. It's one of those bayonet style 120 volt C7s. And I don't know if I have any of those. Well, I hear a buzz. That's probably AM.
We believe that life is fun. Delegates will now have to select the nominee. On and falling flat.
That's FM. Wait a minute. Probably have some dirty contacts / tired or worn out tubes, bad connections, probably bad caps, whole 9 yards. So before we get too carried away with diagnosing why FM doesn't work, let's take the back off and look inside. All right, well, here is the insides. And first of all, it does not have one of those bayonet bulbs. It's a typical C7 socket. So either the bulb is bad or it's just too dim to see with it way back there like that. It looks like someone's been in here. This is a more modern Mylar capacitor. And I wouldn't say this is new, but it looks like definitely a replacement that probably didn't come with the set. It may very well still be good. And there's definitely some corrosion on the cabinet. I'm not wild when I see that yellowish looking stuff. That's cadmium corrosion. It's really not best if you inhale that. So what I try to do is just not disturb it. And when I get this out of the cabinet, I'm just going to wipe it down with a wet cloth and wash my hands. Let's see. It looks like the speaker is attached to the front of the cabinet. And so it looks like you can disconnect it. I'm curious if this is a hot chassis set. I seem to remember maybe it was, because it's a lot of the FM sets, they just could not figure out how to get FM to work right with a floating chassis for some reason. I guess because FM is so much more sensitive than AM as far as being influenced by interference, AC, pollution, all that jazz. And you can get more of that if you're going through a capacitor versus directly. That's what Zenith did. But Zenith was very good about insulating their cabinets and chassis, not cabinets, their chassis and the electronics from the consumer. So we'll see what they did here, if that's the case. If the shafts in the front are isolated, then probably we're okay, because it's got a good solid back that you really can't get past. And it appears that's plastic too. That makes me think they've done some sort of physical isolation, but let's find that out. Okay, well, here's the chassis, and it's interesting. At first I thought this was a German part. It says Tobe. Is that how you spell Deutschland? Deutschmann. I'm not sure what that says, if it is German. I mean, it's a German name, it sounds like. German man? I don't know. If there's any Germans here, I'm sure you're rolling your eyes like, you're wrong, idiot American. Let's take a look under here. And someone's been in here for sure. These are all replacements, these plastic caps. And there's still a low voltage electrolytic here. It's probably coming off the output stage. Let's see. No, it's coming off a 19T8. So I think what I'm going to do before I get too crazy is I'm going to clean the controls, clean the tube sockets, test, and then if it still doesn't work, test the tubes. And that electrolytic is probably, this electrolytic up top here is probably old enough to possibly be bad itself. But we can possibly test that. I wish they had a plug for the antenna. These antennas are real fragile too. Gotta be real careful with them. I'll tell you what I might do is I will... How does this go in there? Okay, I see, that's a guide. That's totally a guide for directing that plug into that slot. Alright, I'm going to try to be careful not to disturb that, but I'm going to do some contact cleaning, retesting, and then test the tubes. Okay, so I cleaned all the contacts and I cleaned all the tube sockets, so now let's try it out again. And by the way, I did find the control shafts for this are physically isolated, so it's a good design. The screws are isolated too. There's no way for anyone to touch this. That's FM. It seems like there's an awful lot of hum. Maybe not. Let me see what AM sounds like.
To 32, 32, 32. That's alert. To 32, 30. Are you curious about who offers the best deals on top-rated Samsung, LG, and Sony?
No, I don't find myself asking that question at all.
And it's not the warehouse clubs. The best Rick Chevrolet.
By the way, I'd be careful. There's the rectifier right there. It's a great way to shock the crap out of yourself, which is why I should be putting this on an isolation transformer, and I'm not, which is dumb. I'm going to test the tubes. I'm going to start with 12 AT7, then 19 T8. This is probably the, well, never mind. It's got both the AM and FM tuning condensers, or does it? Let me look under here. A lot of these are slug tuning. That's probably the FM component underneath. It's interesting, some of these earlier FM sets are rather crazy and elaborate. So let me test those tubes. And if they're good, then there's something else going on. And I'll have to figure it out. Well, it turned out FM had no antenna, so I hooked up an antenna wire.
Real ingredients.
I might have to build a little custom antenna for it. The other thing I don't like is it's got the original selenium rectifier on it. It's warm. It's probably okay, but when these things blow up, the selenium oxide on them will vaporize and it'll stink really bad, and that's also partially toxic, so it's not a good idea to have around. And so I'm going to replace that with a nice little modern silicon diode and a compensating resistor. And that means I'm probably going to have to mount something, terminal strip, and it needs to be on the outside so it can cool. So either I'll put it up here or on the front. I probably don't have a lot of room on the sides. No, I don't. And you shouldn't be putting it right up against the case like that anyway, because it's going to get hot. Alright, so I installed the new rectifier. It's a little selenium diode, not a selenium diode, Jesus. It is a silicon diode with a compensating resistor in front of it, because silicon is more efficient. I'm going to back up here, because sometimes I have a tendency to install these backwards. But I'll know real quick if that's the case. I'm prepared to turn it off. The fact that it's not blowing up yet is probably a good sign. Alright, so it's not messing. I'm going to let it run here for a while because I want to make sure that's the right resistor and it's not going to self-immolate. And then I'll probably replace those electrolytics. I just don't trust them. They look like they're from the 60s, so they're already too old especially if this is going to be put back in the daily use. All right, so I tested it again, and I think that FM is just really marginal, and I'm still getting a lot of AC hum. So I'm going to replace those 3 electrolytics and also this low value one. And then we'll see if the performance is a little bit better. If not, it's just going to be marginal. Some of these designs were not wonderful FM. This is a 1954 model. And some manufacturers really figured out FM, and some others didn't totally figure it out. And the other thing, too, is that someone else has been in here, and I can tell you that those earlier FM sets, where you position your capacitors is very important. If you move stuff around, like it's basically a tuned circuit, and you'll throw it way off. So it could be that someone came in here and just put stuff willy-nilly. We've also got some existing old paper capacitors that are still in here, like that guy. That's not good. Those are always leaky. And again, there's this guy. So we'll replace the rest of that. And meanwhile, the sun's coming out. How nice. It's very distracting. I bought this vintage car, and I'm trying not to work on radios, but we have to because we have a lot of shows coming up in the next couple months. All right, so I got the new electrolytics installed. Let me push this back down again. I'm going to test fire it up and see if it's improved. Okay, so it's time to add the oh-so-famous and controversial audio input feature. And this is critically important, which is this is definitely a hot chassis set. So some people think, oh, well, all you got to do is just run it to ground and to the top of the volume control. But no, if you do that on a hot chassis set, that means that all the potential juice that your wiring in your house could potentially muster through one of these wires is going to go to you. That's pretty bad, so you want to make sure that you go through something first. And what we're going to do is go through this isolation transformer. It's really critical. This is going to prevent any of that from getting to the user and you. And so we're going to install that, and then we're going to be able to listen to, both of those bands as well as Bluetooth running through this. All right, well, here is the audio input sequence. We have, first of all, the cord going through a hole that I drilled in the side of the cabinet. And I put a rubber grommet in there so that if you tug on it, it's not going to get ripped on the metal. And then that goes to this isolation transformer. And then that goes to the either side of the volume control. One side is ground, that's your negative. Positive is where the incoming signal from your radio signal comes from. And here we go. All right, so that sounds pretty good. Now that we have the electronics pretty much squared away, I'm going to put a little glue over the top of that. I always imagine that, what if this breaks free someday? Never had one do it, but if they did, I'd want all this to be insulated. And that's just me. Next, I'm going to take this weird and lovely metallic green paint and give it a buff up clean job. And then it'll be time to do a few other things like clean the controls, and then put it back in the cabinet, and hopefully she'll be good to go. All right, so the next step of the restoration is to go over the paint with this polish. It's too bad there's a few scratches in here, but you know what? It's old. If it's scratched, then so what? I'm just going to buff it out a little bit. I use one of these attachments, so it sure makes my life a lot easier. And I guys use a Carnauba cleaner wax from Meguiar's. They updated their packaging. Must be crappy as a graphic designer if you come up with a nice new design and say, oh, you need to put on there same great formula. The knobs, which are covered in filth as well as outgassing, are in a little bit of warm water and some ammonia, not a whole lot of it, and that'll get that stuff off of there. So I'm going to go over this with the wax and then buff it out, do a little more cleaning, and it's time to reassemble. All right. Actually, it's got a nice tone to it. Realistically, 99% of the people that buy these from us are not going to listen to the radio, so it'll probably just be used for playing their Bluetooth. And whatever, if you want to listen to the radio, you can listen to the radio.
Was in the fourth inning, but after that, not a base runner, and really not a whole lot of hard contact as they went through the bullpen on a day that they.
But anyway, that pretty much concludes this episode of Radiorama. I think it turned out nice. It's hard to film this color, but it's like deep forest green knobs with kind of a sage green metallic paint. But that's it. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.